Now, later on in the video, I'll be talking about the 9 counts in the weekly time frame on NASDAQ. You got it with the QQQ there. You got it with Nvidia now this last week and last week with Bitcoin. They're all hitting major trend lines of resistance. NASDAQ, though, in the weekly time frame, still hasn't quite reached that monthly trend line. Still may. I'll talk about that later in the video. But here, kick things off, again, the daily chart of the S&P 500. We have a 12 of a 13 now completing today with a candle of indecision. The spinning top looking candlestick here could be a continuation or a reversal. Again, I believe that we did move to a new high intraday. The Dow got a new closing high. In my opinion, we're still going to reach my objective target between 6,040 and the 6,100 level, into the low to mid to high 6,100 level if we overthrow the trend line in the weekly time frame, or reach it here in this last week of November. We move into December and reach that level, and I think we're going to turn. But again, I keep saying we're going to move to new all-time highs, my objective target level. But we have a potential 13 count. Now, the 13 count still move above it. These 9 counts, we got it. We still moved above it. We still moved above it. You ended up forming divergences on these turns. Other times you can get a 9 count and you could turn. Here, a 13 count showing, again, the 13 countdown reversal signal saying, hey, prices are getting tired. We still may see higher prices even if we get it. Did you hear what I just said? It doesn't, just because you get a 13, that doesn't mean, oh, the top's in. It doesn't mean that. It just means prices are getting extended in one direction. Still may go higher. I believe we're going to reach my target level. But I wanted to make you aware of that we could see before the weekends a 13 count complete. We could still pull back further, still get it later. Do not have to be consecutive back-to-back bars. Can be breaks. The 9 count, there could be no breaks. And the 13 count, there can be. It starts and stops. It stopped with 7 over here, started with 8 over here. So again, the bar has to be above the bar from 2 bars ago. Intraday basis. Watching to see, do we get a 13 count at some point this week on lighter volume into December if, again, we don't reach my objective target here in November. Now, I told you momentum was shifting back up last week. Green awesome oscillator bar on Friday. So again, I told you I expected S&P to reach new highs. We got it on the Dow. We got a record close. Also, the Russell reaching an all-time high, and then the S&P on an intraday basis. Told you I expected NASDAQ to go back up and fill the gap. It did that today. I don't know if NASDAQ will move to new highs. It might diverge with the S&P, but like I said, I expect the S&P to go towards my target level. The Dow was up nearly 1% today, up 440 points. Closing strong. The S&P was up 0.30%, up 18 points. It was at higher levels during the session, went back and filled the gap. NASDAQ was up just over 0.25%. We had Nvidia down by percent. We still had NASDAQ end up with a gain. And then the Russell up 1.70%. The VIX down nearly 3.5%. Back below 15 at 14.71. I talked about the VIX dropping as the S&P rose on lighter volume here this Thanksgiving week. In fact, my objective target levels are going to be reached for the S&P 500 on the weekly and the monthly chart. Now, why the rally today? This guy right here. This is President Trump's appointment for Treasury Secretary. Wall Street loves this. This is a Wall Street guy. Presumptive nominee for Treasury Secretary. Yields dropped and the market rose. They're dropping because of this guy being nominated. He was nominated late Friday. The market celebrating that with futures on into the session as yields tumble on his nomination. But he's well known on Wall Street and a hedge fund guy, so Wall Street likes that. Now that sent yields turning lower. I've been talking about how we've had this rise with yields and with the dollar, both now starting to pull back. And again, the market will probably move a little bit higher initially on that to my target levels on the S&P, but eventually will join the 10-year Treasury and the dollar in a pullback in all likelihood. Yields continue to drop. The S&P joins it. Dollar pulls back and then is followed by a surge. Breakout of the dollar is a huge red flag and warning sign for the stock market, and especially for Bitcoin as well. Again, they have a longer-term negative correlation. As I told you, we came up to the trend line right here. We got above it. We broke this trend line. We got back above it. And then we came back up to this trend line, this downward trend line. We tried to overthrow it here, but it failed. And then we ended up dropping back down below both of the trend lines. And today, a nosedive of 3.29%. Look at that with the 10-year yield. And I keep telling you, again, yields are going to end up going lower and end up taking out this low right here. Over time, that will happen. It's been rising since the Fed began its rate-cutting campaign back in September. They've been rising ever since. Fed sets short-term rates, but marketplace sets longer-term rates. And again, they've been rising. You know, also I talked about, again, could rising yields be one of the reasons why Powell has, all of a sudden started second-guessing himself? Oh, we're in no hurry to lower rates, cutting rates, and yet the yields have been rising, partly on anticipation of higher inflation, on speculation that we're going to have this economic boom with the Trump administration's new economic policies. That's what Wall Street thinks, and that's why, and the bond market. And we are likely topping process, and right about to usher in a recession. Sharp drop at 3.29%. Now, again, this is going to eventually go down. Now, maybe we fill the gap, maybe we don't, but again, actually it's going to go lower, and the stock market's going to join it. In my video over the weekend, I showed that as the yields fall and the Fed lowers the Fed funds rate, it declines. The stock market has declined with the last two bear markets. Herd believes that the rate cuts are bullish, in fact bearish, or at least they're associated with a bear market and coming recession. And I talked about that. If you didn't watch that video, take the time to go watch it. I talked about Fed is blindsided just like they were in 2007, and we were on the brink of a recession. Fed was completely clueless, just like right now. The economy's strong. No hurry to cut rates. Everything's wonderful. Exactly what they did in 2007. Go watch that video. I'll link it at the end of this one if you didn't see it. Need to watch that video. I go through all the economic data, and dollar is doing exactly. Now, the yields are going to go down, and the S&P and the market will eventually follow. The dollar is likely going to pull back or go a little bit higher and pull back at horizontal support or back to this trend line, one or the other, and then the dollar will surge higher. Again, the dollar is doing exactly what it did when Bitcoin and the NASDAQ topped in 2021. Markets had the run up in off the 2020 low. Eventually, we broke out of this trend line on the dollar. Then we broke this trend line, exactly what we have over here, and then we moved above horizontal resistance. And both first Bitcoin peaked, and then the NASDAQ right after it. Pretty interesting. That's exactly what we have right now. We broke this trend line, bouncing off the 200-week moving average. Here, when we had the run-up, we had dropped below the 200-week moving average. Here we got above it. Notice the 200-week. We got above the 200. Here we bounced off of it, doing the same thing, breaking these trend lines, but bouncing off of it, holding above it. In order for the bull market to continue and to have this new long-term bull market that we're being told is going to happen, the dollar has to collapse below the 200-week moving average like it did back over here. Here it's bounced off of it. Now broken the trend line, broken out, back tested, and then now we've broken this trend line. Now we've broken above horizontal resistance. The exact same thing, the exact same topping process that happened back in 2021. Right after that, the S&P peaked shortly after the NASDAQ. And again, it doesn't have to play out that way. I still think my objective targets will be reached in the monthly. They may top together. Again, as I've said, maybe NASDAQ doesn't make a new high, but the S&P does. It has so far didn't make one today, and we had one with the others. Dollar weekly chart, something worth paying attention to. And again, I don't know if we backtest this trend line or if we go higher and then backtest horizontal support, which was resistance. We'll be watching to see how it unfolds. But the dollar is clearly sending a message. It has a negative correlation with the market. Remember that. And as it was rising back up, the market and Bitcoin were both rising with this breakout of the trend lines and horizontal overhead resistance being taken out. The market eventually topped out. Now the Dow rising to new highs here. Again, I've got this channel going on with these lows over here. Just underneath this channel here, some divergences are developing. You can see it on the MACD there. I'll be watching this area here We've got these divergences going on in the weekly time frame for the Dow. If we include the shadow over here, the trend line is just directly overhead. If we exclude it, then we're right at it there. Nice looking channel here in the weekly time frame. Russell up stronger than the others, but making a new high. Did get a topping tail in the form of a shooting star today, gapping higher. Got a divergence developing here. We're in the upper end of the channel here from connecting these points here. Stalling there, at least so far. We'll be watching. Now, Russell also hitting this upper boundary. This is parallel. The lower boundary. This is a channel. The Russell's moved to new highs above of the 2021 peak. With the 2021 top, the S&P and the Russell ended up diverging. That doesn't always happen. But I'll be watching the close on the weekly for the Russell. And again, hitting these trend lines in the daily and here in the weekly time frame. So the market celebrating the nomination of Scott Bessent for the Treasury Secretary. So here's what we had today. The S&P gapped higher, went to a new intraday high, and then went back, and we filled this gap right here. And we're above the 200. We're still above the 200. Told you just over 2 weeks ago, before the pullback happened, we were going to pull back below the 200, and then now we're back above it, and we're making new all-time highs again. Those at new all-time highs, that was above 6,000, but again, Dow did. This created a candle of indecision in the daily time frame. This push higher and the move back to fill the gap, and then the move off of the gap here in the 5-minute time frame. Taking us back towards the rising trend line in the 5-minute time frame. Again, about this sell-off. Learned about it on the 60-minute chart, and then I told you we were going to rebound back up. Here we're hitting the 200 on the 60-minute chart. That's given us this rally back up here on the 15 and the 5 that we've been looking at here. Now a gap higher and then filling the gap. We still have highs back over here, but the rally and the pullback gave us a candle of indecision here on the daily chart. And again, I talked about these divergences developing here on the RSI and on the MACD. Again, it may be the RSI moves to a new high and forms a divergence up here, higher levels, but the divergence here is still very possible. And again, just slightly above this previous peak, which again, I told you we were going to get a pullback there. We found support at our 20 period and our gap support area. Thought we would rebound, but again, if I was wrong that we'd move to the 50 period and the trend line here, I was right about that. Just like I was right about that, I was right about the presidential rally over here. Bounce off support and our 50 period moving average. I think we're moving up to this trend line right here. I think that will take us to the trend line in the weekly and the monthly time frame on the S&P, where I think that the topping process has a good shot of coming to a conclusion. Talking about moving to new all-time highs over and over. Ever since we were talking about the sell-off back over here, I told you we were going to eventually move to new all-time highs because NASDAQ was going to go fill the gap at 20,400. Move beyond that to the trend lines yet again, which I told you if I was wrong about the July peak, that's where it would be, and we ended up moving higher. The S&P is going to move to new highs. Told you that over and over. We had this rising wedge. I think the pattern is expanding into a larger rising wedge pattern. Again, I continue to believe we're going up towards this trend line right here in all likelihood from these lows back over here and the peak right here. And again, take us to a little bit higher, the 6,040 level, well beyond that into the 6,000 area or on into the 6,100 area if we reach that target. The bearish case would be that we form a double top, and again, it's close but no cigar. Again, I tell you exactly what I think, and I think we're going to reaching my objective target level. So I do think we'll end up going higher. Paying attention to these divergences that are developing. We've got one on the Dow. We've got one going on here on the S&P 500. So S&P will join the Dow and getting a new closing high. It did move higher on an intra-day basis, just slightly above this peak over here. I think it was 6,027.75. This peak over here was 6,017, I believe. Slightly. We bounced off the 200 period moving average here on the 60-minute chart. We had sold off with Powell's no hurry to cut rates comments. Rebounded back up. We filled that gap. I told you that would happen at 59.50. And now we're testing these highs. We did get a topping tail today to come back and fill the gap. We'll be watching. Again, do we get a brand new divergence here or upon this one back over here? We'll be watching to see how it unfolds. But like I said, I think we still go higher. Getting the rally that I predicted would happen. Told you we get a rally here with this divergence ahead of the election. We did. Told you we get a pullback here with this divergence after the election and the Fed meeting. Just over 2 weeks ago, I said that happened, and then told you about we would bottom here at the 200 and gap support. Told you if I was wrong, we'd go down to this trend line and fill this gap down here. But I told you again, I told you I thought we'd bounce to go back, fill this gap, and make new all-time highs, which it did play out that way. The rally can continue on lighter volume with retail investors again as institutions are taking an early vacation here ahead of the Thanksgiving Day holiday. Again, I'm looking at this blue trend line. Again, this could take us up by 6,000 or on into the 6,100 range, depending on when we come into contact with it. And then I think the divergences, once reach my objective target, I think we'll see these divergences begin to play out. But as I keep saying, I believe we're going to new all-time highs. Hit a new intraday high today. I think we continue to build upon that. Watching this upper trend line right here. I'm also watching this upper trend line right here. And if we exclude the shadow right there, they intersect beautifully. They're directly overhead. Now again, if we just look at the channel on the weekly chart, from these lows to these highs, again, this could take us up into the 6,100 range. So keep that in mind. And again, that would overthrow the monthly trend line. But this is a trend line I'm watching here in the weekly time frame. I'm watching this trend line in the monthly time frame. It's likely we're going to turn surrounding this trend line. We may overthrow it and hit the other trend line in the weekly time frame. But again, trend line worth paying attention to. It is long-term, nearly 100 years old. The further right we go to the chart, the higher the trend line goes. Last month, reached it. It was just under 6,000. Month, it's right around the 6,040 area, give or take. Don't reach it in November, a little bit higher in December. And again, we're directly under it. And again, give or take, it's right around the 6,040 area, maybe 6,050, right in that range right there, just eyeballing it. The high is 6,020. So again, I'm looking for this trend line to likely be tagged. We may even overthrow it to the 6,100 range, but then push back down below it, tag that trend line in the weekly time frame and reverse. So just some important trend lines to be paying attention to. Still believe we're going to reach the objective target here. We're just below the low, that higher end target at 6,040, and it can go on up into the 6,100 level if we reach the target trend line in the weekly time frame. If we rise up on lighter volume, reach these trend lines very, very soon. S&P momentum remains bullish here. We're seeing the green oscillator bars. We got that on Friday. I told you I was looking for that, and we're now moving to new highs. So everything I expected is now happening, but I think my objective target level will still be reached. Now, while momentum hasn't turned back to bullish for NASDAQ in the daily time frame, it did last week for the S&P. And through this entire pullback, we still had a bullish reversal of conditions through the entire time. The cloud never did flip, as I've talked about. Seeing momentum go positive here. We're stalling at the upper end of the cloud here, but other trend signals still remain bullish. And Friday, we got the bullish arrow and the momentum line turning back to bullish. So again, I think we reached my objective target in the monthly time frame, as high as that weekly target 6,100 range. Intraday charts had turned back to bullish week after warning previous week that we were going to get a bigger sell-off. So again, back to bullish here. Again, looking for a larger divergence to develop here on the RSI intraday. These other divergences that developed signals bullish intraday here. And again, I think divergences could develop, remain in a risk-on environment. Intraday here, we saw momentum flip back to bullish last week, and now the trend is flipping back to bullish here. So again, I think we have more room to run to the objective target level in the monthly and weekly time frames. Please support the channel with the link directly below that allows me to be able to provide you this information. If you follow the link, it'll take you to a secured site. You can donate any amount you want. I just ask you to partner with me because I don't have any sponsors. I turn those offers down. I don't want to sell you a bunch of stuff, send you to sites where they want to charge you triple commissions, things like gold. No thanks. So I just ask that you help out and do what you can, but I do need to hear from you in order to make it work. I just put it all out there for free. Consider helping out today. I thank you for your consideration for that. The VIX down the 14.5 level, dropping again down. I told you back over here before the election, we could see it drop back to the 200 down here below the lower band. We're moving here right now back to fill the gap right here, which we're right there at that level. Candle of indecision may be a continuation pattern we'll be watching there in the daily time frame. We got that candle of indecision today on the S&P 500 daily chart. Again, we could take out this low and end up forming a divergence here on the MACD, the RSI, and on the stochastic, which I think is likely to rise up to meet my objective target level on the monthly chart. Throw it and reach the weekly target level in the 6100 area. The 50 is still above the 200, again, suggesting we're completing a process that volatility is going to return. The 50 holding above the 200 period moving average. Now, NASDAQ 100 squeaked out again. It's still not making new highs, but even though Nvidia was down by over 4%, Nvidia was down 4.18%, down nearly $6. Again, it got that topping tail rounding earnings. I told you, again, to be watching this upper boundary. We hit it and we reversed off of it. We got a topping tail in the form of a shooting star that was confirmed, and now we get a follow through today again, and we broke this trend line right here. I've been talking about this trend line. Include the shadow. The trend line is a little bit lower. 50 period moving average is down there as well near that trend line, including the shadow. So again, we'll be watching this, but again, getting a topping tail, which is being confirmed, and now getting a follow through. Now, we saw a sharp decline on Nvidia, squeaked out that gain on the NASDAQ. Again, I think we're going to rise here on lighter volume. S&P and NASDAQ still may diverge, as I said. Now, keep in mind, though, over here, Nvidia peaked. Later, it diverged. Lower high, NASDAQ ended up moving to a higher high. We could see something like that if we try to continue to move higher on NASDAQ. I'm watching to see how it unfolds, but again, they're suggesting we may soon see a peak on both NASDAQ and Bitcoin, and remember the S&P is just below that target level as well in the monthly time frame. It's up closer. Again, I talked about this rising wedge. I talked about this trend line breaking last week, and again now this trend line is breaking. So again, then we have the one including the shadow we saw on the other chart. So again, these divergences are playing out with Nvidia. We were told this wasn't going to happen, and Nvidia turning down on blowout earnings. Again, we're likely to witness the bursting of the AI bubble with the recession coming. We'll see if this is it. Right here, we're turning off a major trend line of resistance with this topping tail and this upper boundary being tagged of the rising wedge. I told you to watch for that ahead of the earnings or an overthrow of it or tagging of it. We tagged it, breaking down from the rising wedge. This is not a good sign. And again, Nvidia is not participating in the rally that we had today. Other things driving the market higher, allowing NASDAQ to squeak out a gain, though it lagged. We've got this triple divergence going on with the weekly chart. And again, you come back down, you take out this long-term trend line, you come back and take out the 20-week moving average, then the market is in real trouble. But we are seeing the divergences in the daily time frame play out, and this triple negative divergence going on in the weekly. And as we're hitting the monthly trend line, this triple divergence is forming here in the weekly time frame. Nvidia breaks this trend line, it will confirm a reversal off of the monthly trend line. This channel, I'll show it to you on the monthly chart real fast. I'm talking about Nvidia because NASDAQ follows Nvidia. The market is following NASDAQ's lead. The channel I just showed you is this little black channel rising up to this larger channel that goes back with all of the data that we have on Nvidia. And again, we have this nice looking channel. Nvidia breaks down from the smaller channel, it will confirm a reversal off this larger channel, and again, potential double top, or it could evolve into a head and shoulders, but again, a potential double top as I've been talking about with that rising wedge in the daily time frame. Picking up what I'm throwing down, this is not going to be good for the market if Nvidia is in fact peaking. You can see the bursting of the AI bubble. Oh no, this time's different. Yeah, that's what they said with the dot-com bubble. Time I talk about AI bubble's eventually going to burst. I always hear someone say, oh, no, this time's different. Understand, AI. Nvidia is not recession-proof. Just remember that. I warned you late last week getting these 9 counts. We got it on Nvidia here. And again, we got a topping toe on Nvidia. We'll be watching to see if we get confirmation. We are getting confirmation in the daily time frame, a confirmation and a follow through at the resistance of the upper boundary of the rising wedge on the daily chart, and major resistance in the on the long-term line in the weekly time frame. The weekly chart, we got this 9 count. Again, the 9 count, you can get a turn immediately, which we are, at least so far. Sometimes you overthrow it a little bit and then you turn, like we did over here. Well, actually, step back. We got a lower high. The 8 bar was the high of the count over here. We did turn immediately, but we did get a counter trend and a lower high. Could see something like that happen. But other times, again, you overthrow the 9 count, you go a little higher, and then you turn. NASDAQ did that back at the July peak. Hey, we got the 9 count here on Nvidia in the weekly time frame. Surrounding the earnings, and now Nvidia is down over 4% to start the week off, 4.18%. We did the same thing. Bitcoin right now down 4.26% for the week. And again, I warned about this 9 count last week. My latest video that warned about this before this drop, and as it was, I got warning signals and I shared those. I'll link that video if you want to see my latest Bitcoin video, I'll link that at the end of this video. I have the assets with the most volatility, Nvidia and Bitcoin, both getting 9 count sell signals in the weekly time frame, both turning off major trend lines of resistance. Go watch my video on Bitcoin. You'll see those trend lines I don't have time to show you in this video. With the Bitcoin ETF in the weekly time frame, a 13 fall by 9 is a reversal pattern. We had it 3 weeks ago on the NASDAQ, went just slightly higher than that. We still may go a little bit higher as we did over here, but you did complete this 9 count. The last one gave us this drop of about 16% or so. So again, we're looking 9 counts here on NASDAQ. We got it last week on Nvidia, on Bitcoin. Again, it's showing price exhaustion, just like what we had over here, 13 fall by a 9 on gap higher. I told you it didn't fill that gap yet at 20,900 rounding up. We did it today. We got a little topic tail here on the 60-minute chart. Again, that's what I'm watching, is to see that if does the S&P climb to my objective target, and if so, if we do that this week or going forward, maybe in December. But this week we're going to have pretty light volume. We're going to have a short trading week with the Thanksgiving week holiday here. And again, I'll be watching, does NASDAQ move above this high or high hold? Sometimes they diverge, so you just never know. Sometimes NASDAQ and S&P diverge from one another. But coming back up, filling this gap, I'll also be watching, do we reach streams here to form a divergence? We'll be looking to see how all of this unfolds. Watch a gap. Is it a gap? We got a gap today. We got a gap. Is it a gap and go? Is it a gap and fill, or is it a gap and trap? So far, it's a gap and fill, but if it's a gap and trap, then we start a reversal. Again, I think that this week we can float higher on lighter volume. The big institutions, they've already gone on vacation. The retail investors, they push the market to new highs going forward. We did get it today on the Dow, the Russell, and the S&P. The S&P intraday basis, the Dow on a closing basis. The gap is filled. We'll be watching to see what happens here going forward with NASDAQ. Again, Nvidia was down. NASDAQ was still positive today, and NASDAQ did fill the gap. Again, we have this rising wedge. We bounced off of this lower boundary. Again, NASDAQ turned just underneath this trend line, and again, parallel boundary from the pandemic low. Again, and the run up to the 2021 high. Maybe we overthrow this level. Again, you can go a little bit higher there in the monthly time frame. We'll be watching, but the divergence is still present. The RSI here, the S&P moves to the monthly trend line. I'll be watching to see if NASDAQ makes a lower high or a higher high. There's divergence going on down here at the MACD as well. Price went higher, but the indicators are not. At the 2021 top, prices remained elevated for a little while, sold off, and then rebounded back up or whatever. Stayed elevated for a little while, but then this happened, and you dropped 37.5%. This time, again, it's likely going to terminate the bull market, and again, taking out this trend line will likely take us to move to take out this trend line of horizontal support and eventually move back to this trend line and eventually take out that level there at the 14,000 area. Eventually, I think NASDAQ is coming back down to take out the low of the pandemic low. Before all is said and done in the next bear market, it will drop somewhere between 60 and 80%. I think that will likely be reached at some point in 2026. So that's where I think prices are going. Above this level, again, if you go above this high, you can move towards the monthly trend line by 2 or 3% higher above this peak into the high 21,000 level. Here we're at the 21,000, just under 21,200. You can go up to 21,680 to 21,830 or so, somewhere in that neighborhood, the 21,000 high 600 to low 800 area if we try to overthrow this area. It would be about 2 or 3% above this peak, assuming that the S&P rallies and NASDAQ rallies with it to new highs. And remember over here, they diverged. Over here in July, they diverged. We moved, we got a peak, and then days later, the S&P moved to a new high. NASDAQ did not. I told you I was looking for green awesome oscillator bars. We got it on Friday. We got it again today. Tried to flip the cloud at the highs of the session, but we pulled off of those highs here in the daily time frame. So we're still looking for momentum to try to flip here on NASDAQ, and the momentum line is doing the same thing, where we've already seen that momentum back up last week with the S&P 500. So got to be watching. Can we move to a new high? Do we get a lower high? Going to be watching the NASDAQ closely. Sometimes it does diverge with the S&P 500 at turning points. I think the S&P's got more room to run here to my objective target level. Before the sell-off on the 60-minute chart, we had some warning signs here on the NASDAQ daily chart. But again, right here, momentum hasn't flipped back up either, with the momentum line had momentum flip back up on the S&P 500, not yet on NASDAQ. And I'll be watching, can it make a new high or not? Still at that trend line, that upper channel line in the weekly time frame, clear that area. The momentum is trying to go back into positive territory ever so slightly here. We did get the little arrow pushing up saying, hey, fill the gap, that we could be seeing a flip in momentum here, but the momentum line has not yet flipped, turning back up. We do have that already from late last week on the S&P 500. Gray shaded area is telling us something is getting ready to happen. Now, it may take time, like over here, it took time to develop it. We went up and we went down, and then it kind of, this larger structure, times is shorter, like back over here, again, before this big move down. So I'll be watching this. But again, eventually I think the topping process will complete, but there's not evidence that it has concluded yet. So we will be watching that. We haven't reached my target level on the S&P yet, which I do believe that we will see that take place.